Good evening, everybody. How we doing tonight? Steve Stockton here with you. Come on in. Who we got with us? Stephen Davis. Hello to you, sir. Thank you for being here. Terry Brown. How you doing, Terry? Waiting for some more stories from you. Ludi May. You've been waiting? Yeah, we had several people waiting here for a while. Duncan Limp. Hey, Dave Altman. Appreciate you showing up. Jason. Yay, indeed. Can y'all hear me okay? Just let me know in the chat if I'm too loud, not loud enough. Live, anything can happen. So, Ted Branston, welcome in. Looks like we got a good crowd tonight. I didn't know how we'd do on this day and in this time spot. Texas Horse Rescue. Nice to see you. Come on in. Rita Sturgill. Hey, Jose. How you doing, Jose? Glad to see you here. He's one of our biggest fans. He's a fan of anything I'm involved with, really, from KPNL Radio to the Caravan Library of Lore, all the stuff Lady Ann's got me doing over there. Jose, anytime I post something on Facebook, I can guarantee a like from Jose. Hi, Desert Barb, welcome in. Dave Altman says, Pennyroyal in the house, indeed. Got 50 watching now, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. For those of you that aren't in the know, hello, Miss Linda, St. Augustine, Florida. I'll wait just a couple more minutes here to let people are starting to come in. James Schaefer, Southeast Minnesota, come on in. Ruby, hello. But if you don't know what Pennyroyal is or what it's all about, got a little something here I'm going to show you. Let me get situated here. You'll sit back, relax, and enjoy.
That's stuff that I found just looking at the old hotel, and it's got a checkered past. I'm like, well, what's the checkered past? It's like, well, this was notorious. It was almost like inviting single women to stay here because it was so safe, and then you either never heard from these people again or bad things happened to them.
I don't know that we'll ever really know what happened there, but it would be very interesting to one day find out.
I see these little white critters, like about 3 foot tall, run from the barn up to the street lamp.
But yes, I have seen them. I have seen them having sex with humans. Very bizarre creatures, scaly, slimy.
Grant essentially argued that the Adena had used Kentucky to pierce the veil of the abyss, essentially, and had created a window area there into the abyss.
It doesn't have to be in a lineage at all. It's just a consequence of channeling information from entities outside of your normal reality, and it will always generate cults. There will always be cults because they are just a consequence of reality.
Those n-dimensional creatures, entities that are communicating, and they've been communicating with humanity the entire experience of humanity. Like, the prophet that would hear the voice of God, he had an experience like this. John of Patmos, seeing the apocalypse and writing the apocalypse, he was having an experience like this.
The thing is that this isn't just San Bernardino, and it's not just Somerset, and it's not just the town that I grew up in, and it's not just Santa Barbara, California, what I lived in for a dozen years and has its weirdness. It's everywhere.
All right, folks. Well, what did you think about that? And joining us now from Pennyroyal, also, you've seen him on Season 2 of Hellier. I'd like to welcome Nathan Isaac. Nathan, come on in and say hi to everybody. Are you there, Nathan? Okay, well, I may have lost Nathan. I hear him typing, but I don't hear his voice. Just a minute. Maybe the green man got him. Man got him.
No, there you go, man.
Okay, now I think you're on. Can you hear me now, Nathan?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We were afraid some of the cultists or the green man or something got you there. Well, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. How are you doing?
Doing great. Glad to have you on here. So, tell us a little bit more about Pennyroyal and how that came about. If you want to start with your part in Hellier, if that was the impetus for it, or if this was something you had planned before, fill us in. That trailer there was awesome, but I'm sure there's more to the story.
Yeah, it started, I guess, a couple years before we met Greg and Dana. Greg was the one that came down here to Somerset with Connor, Randall, and a couple years before any of that stuff happened, I had started researching. I'm not from Somerset. I'm a transplant. My wife's from Somerset, and so we moved down here. And I've always been into sort of weird shit, high strangeness, and I had been living in Lexington and went to college there. And so when we moved down here, I was like, man, I'm from a really small town in Eastern Kentucky, and I kind of was like, I'm never going to go back to a small town. And Somerset's definitely not a small town. I mean, it's smallish. I mean, it's about 12,000 people, but this county has about 65,000 people. I think it's the third largest county in Kentucky. And so anyway, we moved down here, and I was like, man, I'm moving back to a rural area. Is there anything interesting here? And so then I started digging into the local folklore, and really, I guess it all, for the most part, started when I was driving back home from work, and I went around the town square. And this was on July the 4th. It was July the 7th. I'm sorry. It was 3 days after July the 4th. And there were all these people in the center of town holding up these signs toward City Hall. And the signs read, "You did it." Right? So I get back to my house, and I'm like, what the hell is going on downtown? What does that mean? It was a whole crowd of people. So I was over at my next door neighbor's house, and I mentioned it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's the family of that girl and that boy that were murdered here." The way the story was told to me, that they had been that they were beheaded here in town in 1994. On July the 4th. I've since found that that's become sort of just an urban legend, but it's a really gruesome murder. It's Linda Gibson and Cody Garrett. I think she was 21 and he was 4 or 5 years old, and that was her half brother. And they were last seen on the 4th of July. In 1994 at this gas station just around the corner from me. And they actually lived on the street that I live on. And that's how my neighbors knew so much about it, because they had known the girl. And they went missing on July the 4th, last seen at this gas station, got into a car, and then they were found 3 days later on the line between the city limits and the county. And actually that caused a lot of problems in the case, because it's such a crazy story. A guy went and picked the parents up and drove them to the bodies. And he was also the last person they were seen with, but he was never charged. And he, if you listen to Pennyroyal, Rod Zimmerman is mentioned in there. And hang on for 1 second, I've got a crazy dog in the background. Yeah, so they ended up, the police arrived, the city police, and the sheriff shows up, and they completely battle each other over whose jurisdiction it is. And apparently one of the bodies was inside the city limits and one was outside the city limits. But it's just the evidence was lost in the case. If you've listened to the podcast, there's a sheriff Sammy Ketron, and he was part of the case. He was later assassinated at a fish fry here in Somerset.
That's like the most southern thing you can think of right there. One of the most. That's the most southern way to go out, I think.
Yeah. So he's putting 2 apple pies that he bought at this fish fry on his patrol car, and he's assassinated. But he was the sheriff at the time of the murders, and evidence was lost. And it's a really famous case. Last year was the 25th anniversary of it, and Dateline actually came to Somerset to do a special on it. I mean, there've been all sorts of crime TV shows about it, and there's also crime TV shows about the assassination of Sammy Ketron too. So, and you can find all that stuff on YouTube. But anyway, it was that murder that I heard about from my neighbors, and everybody kept telling me that there was this weird ritualism involved, and that there was a cult, and that the that there was a group of people sort of eyes wide shut, and the original story was that the murders had happened because they had witnessed something, but it was all this crazy story that I was like, what in the world are these people talking about, and so the stuff that really interested me the most was this idea that there could be a cult here in town, that these guys, that the mayor and the sheriff and judges and lawyers, that they're all in on this ceremonial magic group, that having all these parties, and I found it just too incredible, and so that was really the entry point into looking into the town, and I heard all kinds of crazy UFO stories. Bigfoot stories are huge down here, but lots and lots of UFO stories. But people were telling me stories about dogmen. There's the Civil War battlefield down here, Mill Springs. And so Mill Springs is a haunted battlefield. People see all sorts of, apparitions, hear cannon fire. And so I was finding all this stuff. I was like, man, there's a lot of weird activity here. And then concurrent with looking at that, I was looking at those murders and looking into this concept of, could there actually be some type of cult here? Then we started to find all this stuff about murder, or like other murders, other disappearances, like really, really violent murders, like tons of them. And when you dig into it, it's a long history of violence here in Somerset and in Pulaski County, and like just to a degree that I was like, this is incredible, this is like the most violent place I've ever seen, and so I was looking at all that. At the same time, back up a little bit, when I was in Lexington, we were about to move down here. Like I said, I've always been fascinated by high strangeness and UFO sightings, and just weird anomalous stuff. And I had seen that Sedona, California, or Sedona, Arizona, has at the time it was the highest number of UFO sightings. All these UFO tours, and I'd read about this massive deposit of quartz underneath Sedona, and people were talking about this massive spike of geomagnetic energy from within the Earth, and they were implying that somehow that was affecting people's brains and causing them to see all of this aerial phenomena, right? And so I thought, all right, I can test that. All I've got to do is go get, the NASA and the European, space groups have these maps that you can get, these KMZ files, and you can drop them on Google Earth. And so they do maintain the geomagnetic fields. So, I drop it in and I look at it, and sure enough, Sedona lights up, right? And then southern Alaska, in the area that I think, and this is my theory, that Linda Moulton Howe says that there's an underground pyramid in southern Alaska that the military has control of. When I saw that, I was like, is it possible that that's exactly the area that she's talking about? But the one that I was really excited about, the biggest spike was in the southeastern United States. And, I zoom all the way down, and sure enough, it's fucking Somerset, Kentucky, right? It's Pulaski County. And that set me really looking into this. And then that's when I discovered that there were a number of NASA papers on the Kentucky Anomaly, right? And that's what they called this thing. In Pulaski County, where we are, I've got these maps that have been published about all this stuff. This area has such an intense spike of geomagnetic energy. It's the strongest in the Western Hemisphere. And it's so powerful that it actually changes the surface gravity here in Pulaski County.
Wow.
It's like I've got a surface gravitational map, right? So then I'm like, is it possible that this geomagnetic energy is affecting people here? Because there are all kinds of studies, multiple countries, multiple, colleges and research departments have published papers about the fact that intense electromagnetic and geomagnetic fields can cause people to, higher suicide rates, higher rates of violence. And actually my wife, she also worked at Eastern State mental health facility in Lexington, and a number of other people did too. And the doctors and nurses up there, and I've interviewed multiple people about this. Anytime you say that you're from Pulaski County, they're like, what the hell's going on in Pulaski County? 70% of the people in Eastern State, which takes people from all over the state of Kentucky, are from here. So I was like, man, there's got to be a connection between these things and what's happening. So, I'd done all that research. I was digging into all that stuff. A friend of mine, who's one of the associate producers on Pennyroyal, Kyle Cadell, he owns the International Paranormal Museum here in Somerset, which that's weird too. It's like, what, do you live in a town that has a paranormal museum?
and Somerset, of all places.
Right.
And
Right?
when I first heard that was there, I thought, man, I wish that'd been there years ago when I used to go visit, because that's, what are the odds?
Yeah. And it's wonderful. And Kyle's done an amazing job, right? It's wonderful. And so he built that up, and he was going to all these conventions, and he met Greg at one of the conventions. And so they had, they both had their museums, and he had corresponded with them a little bit about some items. And so anyway, that was their point of contact. Well, I watched Hellier season 1 and enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And suddenly Greg, he contacted Kyle and said, hey, I think they actually came to the museum. He said, hey, we're in town. We didn't know that they were shooting, for the second season, but they were in town in Kentucky and decided to visit the museum. And so while they were there, they weren't filming. They were just there hanging out. And they asked Kyle, hey, could we come back in a couple weeks and talk to you more about some stories? And is there anyone else you think we should talk to? And that's when Kyle said, hey, Nathan's researching all this stuff, about the high strangeness in the area. He's researching all this crime stuff. And so they came back 2 weeks later, interviewed Kyle. Then they came over to our studios above Jarfly Brewing, right? And it's a great brewery. Definitely come visit if anybody's in town. But our studio is upstairs. And I shoot another series called Summer Sessions, where I shoot videos of bands, like live sessions with bands. And so we also produced a podcast up there, the Penny Royal. And so shit, lost my train of thought. So anyway, the studio's up there. Greg came by. We shot up there, and I told him all the paranormal stuff, right? And then he asked me, well, what do you think's going on? I mean, what do you think's causing this? And I said, well, let me tell you about the crimes here in town, and then let's recontextualize this, right? So I tell him about the cult and the murders and all this stuff that we had found, and he flipped the fuck out, like totally flipped out, right? And after they stopped filming, he was like, we haven't talked to anybody about this, but the reason we're here in Somerset is that a woman contacted us and said there was a cult here in town that the mayor, that all these people, all these high profile people, judges and lawyers and politicians, that they're involved in this cult. And he started telling me a bunch of this stuff, and I'm like, holy shit. And at that point, up until that point, I was like, there's no cult here, like this is some, there's drugs involved, God knows, what it is, but, and he tells me this, and I'm like, well, holy shit. Is it possible that there really is a cult, here in Somerset? Because obviously someone told them virtually the same story.
So he basically had heard the same thing that you'd heard from your neighbors and stuff from the people there. Wow.
Yeah, but also he had heard, but this lady that had contacted them had more details about the cult, and her name was Amy in the series, and so she basically lays out that there's this cult that worships the Green Man. And worships, Sooner knows, Pan, and but she says the Green Man, and that they're in Big South Fork, that area.
Oh yeah.
But they're here in Somerset, and all the people are involved, and it's a bunch of stuff about caves. She finds a cabin, right, and in the cabin there's an elevator, and it goes down into this cave system. Right. This was a big point of contention. And so anyway, they tell us this stuff, and we see it on the show, and I'm like, holy shit, man. And they left. They were legitimately freaked out. I think a lot of people have thought that was dramatized in Hellier, when they're standing outside. And I think Connor's the one that's like, I'm done. Let's we shouldn't do this. That was real, because I was upstairs saying the same thing. I'm like, maybe we should stop this. We shouldn't research anymore. Like, I don't know what's going on. So, so they left. And after that, I was like, well, maybe we should look deeper into this. And I started doing more research. Now here, this is the totally nuts thing, right? So during this time period, like maybe a year before I saw Greg, I was started working with an artist named Dan Dutton. And Dan's a really famous artist. His works have been shown in, like, I think one of the wings of the White House had his works. And, Mitch McConnell, Senator Mitch McConnell gave a speech I think it was in 1994. He brought this over to me. He was like, you'll enjoy this. And it's Mitch McConnell giving a speech to Congress that Dan Dutton has changed art in America, right? so it was a weird little thing just because it was Mitch McConnell.
And I've got a picture of Dan on the screen there, and his music is incredible. The operas and things that he's written, it's just what amazing performance. A musical genius.
Yeah, dude, it's amazing. And he's a painter. He's a sculptor. They have a sculpture studio. He has a farm called Dandyland here in town. But so Dan's this, just amazing artist, and he's become one of my best friends. And so about a year before the Hellier stuff happened, or before Greg came to town, Dan and I started. He had told me this crazy story, which is in its full telling in episode 4 of Pennyroyal. He tells me this story about how he was hired by the state of Kentucky to do this tourism job and take pictures of the scenic highways and byways, right? And so he goes east to Whitesburg and then on into Elkhorn City. And so when he takes this trip, at that time he was working on an opera called The Faun, which was about Pan, and he was doing tons of research about Pan. And he strange things start happening in Whitesburg. Definitely listen to the episode for the whole thing. I won't tell the whole story here, but weird things start to happen in Whitesburg. By the time he gets to Elkhorn City, he has this crazy liminal experience, right? This crazy thing happens where he thinks he encounters the archetype of Pan, right? In Break Center State Park, which is a liminal space. It's a park I think it's one of the only parks that's between two states. I think it's Kentucky and Virginia. And so, he has this crazy thing happen, this crazy experience. He tells me about it. And after he tells me, I'm like, Dan, we've got to make a film about this, right? We've got to make this into a film. And so we started doing that. And I told him, I said, this film needs to culminate in us going to Elkhorn City and recreating the Faun. It's just, it's Pan and two nymphs, right, inside of a gauze box. And I was like, we'll go build the box out in the woods, in Break Center State Park. We'll restage the opera, and we'll try to do this sort of artistic ritual to invoke the archetype of Pan to trigger the same experience that you had, right? That was before the pandemic happened too. We had all this stuff set up, and it was like, well, obviously we can't finish that. So we're still working on the film, and the film will be done this coming spring and released. But then Hellier comes out, right? And I think it was November of last year, season 2, and the weird thing was that episode 8 is called The Secret Commonwealth. And obviously it's a reference to the early book, on Fae from the 1600s, right? I think his name is Robert Kirk. But the crazy thing was that Dan's major work, it's a 4-part opera series that's called The Secret Commonwealth. Right. So I was like, well, this is weird. I was like, and I didn't know, when Greg came down here and interviewed me, at no point did we talk about Pan or talk about Dan or any of this stuff. I didn't know that season 2 was even going to involve Pan so much, or even William Grimstad's The Rebirth of Pan and this concept of this earth spirit. Right. And so I immediately watched the episode I'm in just to make sure I don't look completely crazy, and I see that it's called The Secret Commonwealth. And then the final episode of the second season is The Night of Pan. And they basically, obviously, I'm sure everybody's seen the show. They come and, Greg and Dana and the whole crew, and they go out to this area of Pulaski County and into the Sloan's Valley cave system. I think it's the 13th largest in the U.S. and try to summon Pan, right? And I was like, what the fuck, So I texted Greg as soon as I saw it the next morning. I texted him. I said, dude, that's the finale of the film I'm working on with Dan Dutton, where we go to Elkhorn City and try to invoke Pan. And he says, I'm looking at my wall right now, and I have all these pictures of Dan Dutton on it. And he was like, it's not in the TV show because I didn't know how he fit into any of this, right? And also, when you think about this, that most people don't realize that Hellier is a suburb of Elkhorn City, right? Mm-hmm. So they literally came from Hellier to Somerset to perform a ritual to invoke Pan. And we, for this final scene, we're going from Somerset to Hellier to Elkhorn City to perform this ritual to invoke Pan, which was just totally, I was like, this is totally crazy, right? And then later, I'm talking to my neighbors, the ones that introduced me to the stories of the murderers, and I find out that it's their family, their great uncle owns a cabin in that area that actually does have an elevator in the bathroom, a medical lift down into the cave system.
Wow.
that they used for convalescence, right? And I'm like, what? And then I verified that from 3 other people, and they were like, yeah, that's. And it turns out it was the one. I think Amy, if you look, people that looked deep into this, like she was arrested and she was in jail in the show. I think that was actually, I'm pretty sure that was one of the cabins that they actually broken into. So it was true that she had seen this. And then, while I was working on Pennyroyal, I found all kinds of really, really crazy stuff about magic groups, magicians that were coming to Somerset in the 1970s to perform rituals in that area of the county where the caves are. It's on the edge of Daniel Boone National Forest. And so none of this is in the show, and a lot of this stuff's going to be in the second season because I could not fit everything in there that had happened. And so and it was just to try to tell all of this stuff too. It's like it's a very crazy, complex, weird thing, And to me too, it's like that's the most amazing thing about this is the mystery of it all. The fact that all of these things just seem to stack in the same place, the same physical place. Because, I find out that the Bait Cabal, who they published the Cincinnati Journal of Ceremonial Magic in the 1970s. They were heavily influenced by Kenneth Grant and Nema, Mary Ingalls. She was the leader of this group. And so this group they were part of this concept of like Kenneth Grant's Typhonian current, and so they believed in like a lot of Lovecraft stuff and a lot of things that of these entities beyond space and time, and so they had a lot of their rituals involved time magic and retrocausality, and they were coming here because of the intense energy here and performing rituals out near where Hellier performed their ritual to Pan, and near this mine that became the central part of the Pennyroyal story. Because, in episode 3, I interview a woman named Pamela who told me that she was part of this cult here in town when she was a child in the 60s and 70s. And so she had told us the story, and it was very strange. For her, those experiences are absolutely real. Hellier comes out, and there's a lot of weird stuff in Hellier about the cult, and the Amy girl says a bunch of things to Greg about the word slough, short little ugly fuckers, and like there are all these weird references. Alan Greenfield's documents from Terry Wrist. People are familiar with the Hellier story, but Kyle says to Pamela, he mentions the word slough, and she starts to cry, right? And so then he's like, oh my God, like you have heard that word before. And he asks her more about, where did all this stuff happen that you're telling us about? And she said, it happened at the Mount Victory mine. And I'm like, is there even a mine in that area of the county? So we start digging, and then Kyle finds this article that there was a Mount Victory coal company, a Mount Victory mine, and that it was owned by this man named Alexander Guterma, that the New York Times referred to as Mr. X. And I'm like, what? I'm like, this woman's telling us there was an international cult performing black magic rituals, and they were doing it at this mine. And then we find a New York Times article that says that mine was owned by an international man of intrigue, right? So we start digging into this and find out that the Alexander Guterma was like, he committed the largest stock fraud in U.S. history up until 1959, and he had come out of nowhere. He was in the Philippines, and his past, even his family, his business partners, his lawyers, no one knew where he came from. But in 1951, he suddenly shows up in the U.S. and within 6 months becomes one of the richest men in America. And he tried to overthrow the Dominican Republic. He was involved in that. He's tied to the JFK assassination. He's named as a co-conspirator and an accomplice of Des Moines show. And so it was like, wow, this is nuts.
I've listened to that episode. I've listened to all the Penny Roll episodes. I'm going back and listening to them again. But that one was just really weird, that this guy had no background, anything that anybody could find, and yet he does all these things. He owned casinos overseas and in Las Vegas, all these businesses. And I know you're getting to that part, but just that's fascinating that you were able to dig and find out all this stuff about such an obscure person, yet he had so much influence in that area.
Yeah, then that's exactly it, though. It's like, he is so influential, but no one had ever heard of this guy. I've never heard of him. It's the kind of person that you find and you're like, I should know about this. This is a significant person in history. He's just involved in so many things. At one point, he was the CEO of more companies than anyone in history at the same time. It was like 16 companies or something crazy like that. He was the CEO, but he was doing a lot of illegal stuff. His license plate was GOD, which I think is really funny, just because he's obviously a very, he thought he was a genius, and he thought he was always the smartest guy in the room. But he has such a weird, obscure history. A lot of people believe that he was a Nazi intelligence agent through the Galen organization. And, there are documents that would seem to support that, and it's weird when you start unraveling all this, but to find out that, in 1975, he moved his entire financial empire to Somerset, Kentucky, and bought that mine from, which this was crazy too, Lester Burns, who is one of the most infamous, he's probably one of the most infamous attorneys in U.S. history, but definitely in Kentucky's history. He's just, they wrote the book Dark and Bloody Ground about him, and he's just this crazy character that was larger than life. He owned the mine, that this guy bought. He owned it with his business partner, and this was weird too when we found this. I mean, we had researched the shit out of all of this, and my research partner, Darian West, he and I, I've said this a lot, and I think I said it in the show too, is, we really do a lot of data mining and have clients that we work with, automotive industry clients, data mine, VIN numbers and do all this stuff. We're good at data mining, we're good at the research and in finding these things. And I thought we were just completely finished researching all that we could possibly find about Guterma. And it was like the day that I told him, I was like, I think this is it. I don't think we can find anything else. That night, he calls me and he's like, man, I just found out that Lester Burns' business partner was Spiro Agnew, Vice President Spiro Agnew. And I'm like, what? The vice president of the United States owned part of the mine that this Mr. X purchased and then moved his entire financial empire here. And Lester Burns, he took the money and bought a house next door to Richard Nixon in Florida. I found all these newspaper articles. That's the thing about this story, too, is like every bit of this is backed up by newspaper articles and actual factual things that you can find, And it's even the stuff with the intersections with Hellier. I mean, those things really happened. That's what's so strange. It's like, what are the odds that we would intersect with Greg and I would be working with Dan on the Fawn, and then Hellier would come out and their stuff is totally centered on Pan. It's incredible. That part of the story by itself is absolutely amazing. And then you find on top of that Alexander Gaterma moved here and owned the mine that supposedly this cult was at. And then 2 years later, before he's supposed to be possibly called before it was the House Subcommittee on Assassinations, they reopened the JFK case. That week, de Mohrenschildt was supposed to testify, and he was the longest testifying witness in the original, the JFK hearings, which were one of the guys that was part of that was John Sherman Cooper, whose hometown is Somerset, Kentucky, which is crazy. There are only 7 men on the Warren Commission, and John Sherman Cooper was one of them. And you've got Gaterma, who people are saying could have been involved in the JFK assassination, and he moves his empire to Somerset, Kentucky, where John Sherman Cooper is. But the week that De Mohrenschildt was supposed to testify, that day he committed suicide and blew his head off with a shotgun upstairs right before he had to go. But a few days later, Alexander Gaterma was flying from Boca Raton, Florida, to New York City with his entire family on his private jet to go to the circus. And he diverts the plane to Somerset, Kentucky. For some reason, no one knows why, was here, did some business, and then he flew out of Somerset, and the plane crashed in Brooklyn and killed his entire family and him. And I've got a newspaper, a front page newspaper, that has his death and De Mohrenschildt's death on the same front page.
Wow.
It's crazy, And a lot of people believe he was assassinated, which is just totally crazy. So to have, already the Kentucky Anomaly here and that whole influence of people being more violent or just that it's this really energetic, the most energetic place in terms of Earth energies in North America, in the Western Hemisphere, that on top of that, all of this Pan stuff is happening here. Dan's here, and there's all this magic happening around Dan. And then Hellier comes, and there's the intersection with that here. And then to find out about Gaterma, that was here as well. It was just all of these things that were just by themselves are absolutely incredible to see them, this confluence of things immediately made me believe that something extraordinary was happening here in Somerset.
Definitely. And that whole area, and I've prowled around up there all over the Big South Fork, Cumberland Falls, Lake Cumberland, Daniel Boone National Forest. There's something weird. There's something off about that whole area. You can feel the energy in there. There's, like you said, there's Bigfoot, there's ghost stories. You got the Little Green Men in Hopkinsville. There's just everything there. And it's weird. And you've got the biggest underground cave systems in the world right there. Mammoth Cave and all these other places. And then like that thing I told you about where I'd met some goth kids up at Yamacraw, which is an old abandoned mining town. I was up there in the late 80s, early 90s. My daughter, who's in the chat here, her other set of grandparents lived in McCreary County, in Stearns, Whitley City, in that area. And before she was born and when she was small, we'd go up there on the weekends, and I'd get out and ramble around by myself. And I ran into these kids that they were probably teenagers, maybe early 20s, and they knew all these ghost stories, all these legends. Tombstone Junction, that's right there near Cumberland Falls. It had pretty much all but burned down by that point, but they would go in there at night and sneak in, and it was haunted. And I've been behind Cumberland Falls in the caves where you're not supposed to go back there. And I've heard stories of people hearing like a church choir singing way back in those caves. And there was, I think, a ferry accident there just above the falls. And there's been a couple of places that burnt down there. You've got DuPont Lodge. Again, you have the DuPonts, one of the richest family in the world, that bought land in that area and built that lodge. It's still impressive.
Is that really true? Is that true, Dave?
Oh yeah,
that's Steve. Is the DuPonts?
Yeah, that's the DuPont family that built DuPont Lodge. They built that as a hunting lodge to entertain their friends that wanted to come. And if you wanted a place to do things away from prying eyes, I mean, that is some rugged wilderness up in that area.
Oh, that's crazy too, because that's a weird connection. I think the DuPonts were connected to the channeling of the Nine also.
Yeah. So there's that whole area. There's a taint to it almost, there's something weird about the whole place.
Do you know the story of the? This is an alleged story. I don't know if there's a lot of historical precedent for it, but there is a story that there was a slaughter of Native Americans at Cumberland Falls.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And it was like a huge slaughter, but I don't think it's ever been proven. But people say they hear chanting and Native American singing and. That's a weird thing. And there's all kinds of dog sacrifices in that area. There's actually dog slaughter falls, right? Mm-hmm. And there are tons. That's a weird thing that we came across recently in the last few months of research. Just tons and tons of stories of dog sacrifice in this area, which seems to belie maybe a connection to the cult of Hecate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you start to find all this stuff about Pan, and then it's like, well oh, that's what I was going to say about too, Steve, is that while I was researching all this, I was like, is there a green man cult here, and is it possible? Once I found out that the elevator was real, right, that was an actual place, I thought, well, what if she's actually, this Amy girl in the show is not, what if she is telling the truth? She's not lying. And so I started to dig into, is there a green man cult? And I found this group called the Guidonic Order. It's a group of Welsh. It's an international order of magicians of magic. They're not really druids. They're not Wiccans. They're their own thing, but it's based on Welsh magic. And they were founded in 1955 in San Francisco. And again, it's an international group. But in 2004, guess where they moved their international headquarters to from San Francisco? To fucking Somerset, Kentucky. You can even read about it. There's a whole thing about it online. And they worship, the green man. They worship Sunernos, the horned god Pan. So I find out that there really is a green man cult here. And I haven't been able to locate the people because online in all of their chats and everything, they all use their Welsh, magical names. Mm-hmm. So we've not been able to uncover who is a part of it. But I would love to find someone who's, and I don't think they're doing anything nefarious. They're not sacrificing children, and I don't think they're tied to any of this. But it just adds another layer of reality to sort of the unreality of the story that Amy girl told mm-hmm. Grant. That you're like, well, those are two things now that are true, right? There was an elevator in a cabin.
Yeah.
There is a green man cult here. And it's just another thing for me that I'm like, what is going you know?
And that's what I was getting to with these goth kids that I met that were taking me to all these weird places. They took me to a place they called the Bunker, and I've told you about this before.
Mm-hmm.
It was looked like it'd been a strip mining area or something. Again, it was night. I was in the back seat. Somebody else was driving, but they took me to this place, and it looked like a guard shack or something there. And they got the door open somehow. I don't know how they did it. I'm assuming a little B&E was involved there. But inside, it wasn't a guard shack at all. But it was like an elevator shaft, except it was stairs. And it went down, just switched back and forth and back and forth. I sent you a picture of those stairs that they have in Mammoth Cave. It was like that, but in a vertical shaft that appeared to be made out of concrete. Again, just this was by flashlight in the middle of the night. And we went down to a point where it was flooded, and you couldn't go any farther. I don't know how many flights of stairs we went down. But they said when it wasn't flooded, in certain times of year, you could go down there. There was a central hallway with more hallways off of it. Now, I don't know what was down in there. It was one of those places I was anxious to get out of there. I was afraid some joker would lock us in there. Be several feet underground in the dark and in a flooded shaft of some sort. And that was the area that they were calling it Towad, Towwad, I think is how you pronounce it. And that's in that whole area. That's there between. It's on Highway 27 or in that area, like you're going back toward Oneida from Whitley City, Oneida, Tennessee. So there you go. And I know you said that you'd spoken to someone who knew some strange girl from high school whose family owned land in that area, and there had been a strip mine there, and she had told all kinds of weird stories about goings on there. So I'm wondering if that might not have been the same people, or at least maybe they knew one another. Now, this would have been around 94, and I think from what you were telling me, that was about the same time.
Yeah, that was what was so weird. You told me that story. Darian, my research partner, I'm like, hey man, Steve told me this wild story about the bunker, right? And I describe it to him, and he's like, man, that's the property that this girl that I went to high school, lived on. And he said that she told him that the land and her family were cursed, and it was near, there was a strip mine on the property, so the land looked blighted. It looked
that's the way
like
this was. Again, it was night, and I only saw it by car lights and flashlight. But yeah, it looked like where they do the strip mine, where there's just nothing there and just lots of it.
Yeah. Well, he said this was the crazy thing too, that she told everybody that her family was cursed, that the land was cursed, and everyone that dated her in high school died. Like she had like, it was like 3 or 4 boyfriends in a row, all died while they were dating her, and she said it was because of the curse on her family.
Wow.
And I actually believe that it probably is her that you met, and that's going to be one of it's just going to be another one of these crazy coincidences where we're like,
thing, because that time Yamacraw, now they took that old rail bed and made like a running trail or something out of it. Yeah. They have races back there, like 5K and 10K marathons and stuff, I think. But back then it was just the old railroad bed, and it was grown up. And I was way back in there. There's some big concrete pylons on the hill there above the Cumberland River. And I don't know if it'd been an old tipple or part of a water tank support or something, but it looked strange just out there in the woods. I like the juxtaposition. I call it Crawhenge because there's just these big standing man-made monoliths. And I was out there taking pictures of that, and out of the deeper part of the woods comes this group of 4 people, two guys and 2 girls, dressed head to toe in black. And, of course, they took an interest in what I was doing, and I just struck up a conversation with them, and they're like, oh, man, we know all the places to take you. And they did. I went around a lot of different places with them, not just on that occasion, but several other occasions. I didn't go sneak into Tombstone Junction, which I've regretted. But, we'd go down and try to see the Moonbow, and they knew the haunted places there around Cumberland Falls. For those of you who don't know, they have a Moonbow there when the conditions are just right, and I think it's in the summertime, like August or so, about 2 o'clock in the morning. You can see a rainbow in the dark made by the moon. There's only, I think, one other place in the world where you can do that, and I can't remember. It's either in Africa or Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that
But
another strange part of that?
yeah, and that's another strange thing. And just anytime I ever went up there or went to Somerset or went to Cumberland Falls or Lake Cumberland, there was always something weird. I went once during a flood, and the river was way up, and there was like a cow came floating down the river, a dead cow, bloated, and everybody's just like laughing and pointing, and I'm just like, and everybody watched it go over the falls, and people cheered and everything, and I'm like, man, only in southeastern Kentucky.
That's so crazy, dude.
And then occasionally somebody would go over the falls, and a couple times I volunteered to go do search and recovery, and I wasn't with any of the groups that found anybody, but it happened. People either on purpose or they get too close and get careless, and you can go right over those falls.
Plus, that's that's where the the Cumberland Falls Meteor crashed. Which we talk about in the show. Which was it's in the Smithsonian. And it crashed there in 1919. It's just such a strange place.
Now, it makes you wonder, with the magnetic anomaly and everything there, is that what drew the meteor to that area, or did the meteor cause the anomaly? Or
I've often wondered that too, because you hear about all these meteor strikes in Siberia, and there are a lot of geomagnetic anomalies there, and so I've wondered, and plus obviously there's the Tunguska meteorite explosion that leveled so much area in Siberia. So.
Didn't you also talk about a rain of flesh there that Charles Fort wrote about?
Well, so the Charles Fort wrote about the Kentucky meat shower, and that was in Olympia, Kentucky, I think. It wasn't the famous meat rain wasn't here. It was there, right? Mm-hmm. And samples of that are actually at, which I only found this out once I started researching all this, the college I went to in Lexington, Transylvania College.
What a great name for a school, right? Transylvania U.
Right. Well, I mean, you got to remember too, though, that Kentucky used to be called Transylvania. Mm-hmm. It was owned by the Transylvania Land Company. So this entire region that we were in is Transylvania, and so
and a lot of those town names, they sound strange, like Blue Heron and Zenith and all this, but that was the coal companies that owned those little towns.
Even Towad, that's a mining company, mm-hmm. and I had to look up what the phrase Towad meant, and that was the weirdest thing when we were talking the other night about this, and you were telling me Towad, trying to figure out how it was spelled. And what the phrase meant, because Darian was trying to remember too, and I finally found a bunch of old newspaper articles about it, and then I showed you where it's actually located at, but it's super strange. But Transylvania University, they actually have a collection of Transylvania is one of the oldest colleges, I think in the U.S., but it's definitely in Kentucky. It's the oldest college, I think. Mm-hmm. They have a guy named Rafinesque. He was one of these just geniuses that knew so many different fields and things, and he I think they call him an autodidact, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so he studied plants, and I think he was a botanist and taught botany at Transylvania. This was back in the 1700s, 1800s. But he ended up being the first person to map the Adena mounds and the earthworks, the ancient earthworks throughout Kentucky and the Ohio River Valley, which is crazy. But they had I think he started this section of the library that was for oddities, and they've had all kinds of medical stuff over the years, and so it ends up that in this same collection that he started, the only known sample of the Kentucky meat rain is in a vial at Transylvania University. And I was there. I didn't even know it. And
now I've got to go visit. Next time I'm back east, I want to go see this oddity collection. But I heard, and I think you talked about this on the show, when that meat fell, there were people that ate it and said that they thought it was like manna from heaven.
Yeah.
And
they said it tasted like mutton,
So slow-moving sheep got picked up by a tornado or whirlwind and shredded and rained back down on the people.
Well, the main explanation for it is that
buzzard puke.
Yeah, vultures puke, which is totally crazy.
But I've heard that some of those strips of meat had hair on it, like little short hairs and things. So
right. So it's like, oh my God.
I'm not going to eat anything that falls from the sky. I'm sorry. I'll pass on that.
But while we were researching all this, I mentioned this to, I collect tons of stories. For me, a lot of this is about folklore and collecting folklore. Whether it's modern folklore or really old stuff too. But I'm talking to Dan, and Dan Dutton, he collects ballads, and he also is a collector of folklore. So I mentioned the Kentucky meat rain, and he was like, "Well, it rained meat here on Campground Road." And then this is off of Highway 39. And he's like, there were rains of frogs. There were rains of fish. He said there was a meat rain. He was like, my mother talked about this to all these people. He was like, you can talk to the grandparents of the people in this area, and that happened, early in the 1900s. And I'm like, what? That's crazy. But then it's like, is it the anomaly? Is it the Kentucky anomaly that somehow is, I don't want to sound crazy, but is it opening up portals? Is it drawing?
There's something there. And, there's a lot of places like that. And you talked about Breaks being the one place where it's split between two states. The Smokies is like that. Half of it's in eastern Tennessee and the other part's in western North Carolina. And it's known for all the weirdness there, all the mysterious disappearances, tales of the little people, Cherokee legends like Spearfinger, fairy lights, spook lights, hauntings. Cades Cove and the North Shore Fontana Lake are considered the most haunted areas in the Smokies, and that's also where a lot of these disappearances have happened. Dennis Martin, Trini Gibson, Thelma Pauline Melton. So it makes you wonder about these places. And again, you've got the caves there in that area. You've got boulder fields. Now there's missing people there too, unsolved missing people disappearances, right?
Yeah, I mean that was another strange thing. Just you don't realize how strange the place is that you live in until you really start looking at it, And that's why I was trying to tell everybody, like, everybody should take a really good hard look at where they live and dig a little deeper, because you're going to find some strange stuff that's going to recontextualize everything for you. Because here in this area, there are all these stories of serial killers, of people, throwing. There was a woman's body was thrown off of a bridge here near Fishing Creek, and they could never identify the body. I think they recently possibly did, but they thought it was connected to a serial killer that I think she killed the woman in California and drove here to dump the body. Just tons of stories of people going missing, and obviously the Daniel Boone National Forest is a part of all this, and they absolutely do not release any information on missing persons in the forest. If you go to Walmart, this is strange too. Walmart's sort of the de facto center of town in a sense. Not really, I mean, obviously there's a town, but I'm just saying everybody goes to Walmart, right? And it's just how Kentucky is. I imagine that a lot of other places are like that too. But they have a big wall with all the missing persons. And someone pointed out to me, they were like, have you ever looked at that wall before? And I hadn't. And then I looked at it, and it's crazy. There are so many missing persons. It's frightening, right? So then you're like, what's happening with that, And they found burned out cars outside of the caves, where Greg and Dana did. I think it's where they did the ritual. A guy's body was immolated completely to dust, and just all these like weird murders, weird disappearances all throughout this area. And honestly, when you look at the area where the mine is near the caves where they perform the ritual to Pan. It's all in this one area, and it borders the Daniel Boone National Forest. And if anybody's familiar with Kenneth Grant, they talk a lot. In NEMA, I mentioned the Bait Cabal earlier, they mention that they call this area, they refer to it as the Cincinnati Vortex. And they believe that, ancient Adena or Hopewell people, Native Americans, they were performing rituals that opened up a gateway over top of Daniel Boone National Forest in this area that was never closed.
Wow.
And so, but think about that. Think about that statement, and then think about the fact that there really is the Kentucky Anomaly here. And so what they believe they opened up may have always been here. Not always, but at least for thousands of years. And so there is even a reality to that statement, that this area, there is something that seems to make, if you want to call it the veil, or, whatever it is that separates, dimensions, or the world, whatever it is, that maybe it's thinner here, and maybe there is an opening.
There are a lot of places like that. Here in Southern Oregon, you have the Oregon Vortex down near Crater Lake and that part of the state. And then just across over into California, there's all kinds of weird stuff on Mount Shasta there. I've done a couple of videos about Mount Shasta. And again, disappearances, Lemurians, ascended masters, UFOs, Bigfoot, a little bit of everything. Then you mentioned Sedona, Arizona. That's another place. Joshua Tree, California. You have these energy spots. On the East Coast, you've got places like the Bennington Triangle and the Burlington Triangle, where there's just these little pockets of weirdness. And you talked about, that you should examine your town and stuff. Now, I'm a folklore collector, too. I'm a storyteller. That's my main thing. I write books and things, but I'm not really an investigator. I'm more of a researcher. But that's one of my favorite things to do, is to go into these little towns and either talk to the oldest people you can find, go to the nursing homes, or anywhere where there's older crowd, and then where the young people hang out, the teenagers, the high school kids. Those two groups know the best stories. The old people will tell you stuff that happened years and years ago, and then the high school kids all know where the haunted spots are and the hot spots for any type of paranormal activity and everything. And one of the common ones that I've found, there's a crybaby bridge everywhere. I couldn't tell you how many little towns, little communities I've been to in Kentucky that have a crybaby bridge. Same with Tennessee. They're in North Carolina. They're in Texas. It's one of those things where it's somewhere, I think that really happened. Some insane person did throw their baby off a bridge, and then it causes some sort of paranormal activity. But either that, or it's a more common pastime that I'm aware of, because all these little towns, you have that. And that's another thing, the whole crying baby trope. I've heard of that. It was within Bigfoot sightings and with UFO sightings. I think somebody will hear a baby crying and go out to investigate, and then they have some other kind of paranormal encounter. So it's all these things tied together. And Cisco, Lady Liberty, who's in the chat here, we wrote a book together. She's got a real interesting theory about the paranormal being like an onion, that you peel back one layer, there's another layer, and you just keep peeling it, and when you get to the middle, then there's another onion, then you start the layers all over again. Charles Fort said, one measures a circle beginning anywhere. So there you go. It feeds back in, and then with Hellier, you had all these synchronicities that kept popping up, and now with Pennyroyal and the other things, the Kentucky Anomaly, and all this other stuff, it all just fits in together. It's more synchronicities, but I don't think it's synchronicity or coincidence. I think all this is tied together for a reason.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. I mean, I think that's what, for me, has been the most fascinating part of all of this, right? is that that how is it possible that all of this stuff is happening? There has to be something connecting this together, and I've been calling it, the mystery, but it's like, it's not just coincidence, there's a structure to this there. And I love what you were saying about she likened it to an onion, because each one of those layers that you peel back, and we talk about it in the show in the final episode. It's just this idea that there seems to be an element of feedback involved in this, and I talk about second order cybernetics, because it's this idea that the observer observes an event or something that happens, and then there's feedback, and the system observes the observer observing this event.
You peer into the abyss, the abyss peers into you, that type thing.
Yeah. It's Charles Fort, I think it was Charles Fort, or maybe it was John Keel, but when you look, it was John Keel. When you look at the phenomena starts looking back at you, you know, and so like, I do feel like that a large part of this is, there are so many aspects to this, so many different layers. We're talking about there's the Keno monster here, which is a Bigfoot, and in Fishing Creek, where the woman's body was dumped, that also is where a prominent Bigfoot researcher found a ton of Bigfoot, prints, and actually got, casts made. And so, like, it's just, there have been sightings of white Bigfoots here in Pulaski County.
Now that's unheard of outside the Himalayas, I think, where you have the abominable snowman.
But it was a hairy white creature, they said, with red eyes, and there was an interdimensional quality to it, right? Of the creature crossing the road, and then the witnesses drove, another 3 or 4 miles, and it crossed again. Yeah. And so this idea that somehow there was, some strange thing that happened. Yeah. But I found in Albert Rosales's, humanoid series.
Wow, that's a good series. He's got some amazing stuff in there.
Dude, it was, so I got the whole collection, went through it all. He has 2 stories of the same creature within a 20-year period, of a white furry creature crossing the road with red eyes in Maysville, and then in another town, I forget the other one. And then I found witnesses that had the same story here, but also on Highway 39, where Dan Dutton lives, where this Adena mound in Pulaski County supposedly is located. And then there are all these dogmen stories from there, and all these crazy things on Highway 39. And then in terms of a number, the weirdness of numbers, this idea of 39 also being 93, and then the connection to, Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley and the Thelemites and things. And it's like a vicious cycle. It just ties back in, and this happens and that happens. And then a lot of this, if you plug it into the gematria, then you see all this again in the numbers, or the Kabbalah, it's kind of the same thing.
What do you think about all of this? I mean,
I'm telling you, I've spent a lifetime. I saw my first full body apparition when I was 6 years old. It didn't scare me. It just, puzzled me. It's like, what's that? That's not supposed to happen. And it just sent me on this lifelong quest into the paranormal. I didn't choose it. It chose me, if anything. So I've got a whole book, My Strange World, full of experiences that I've had, and that's not all of them. That's just the ones I put in that book. And I think there's some people that, like I said, it's drawn to me. I don't necessarily have to seek it out. I've never lived in a house that didn't have some kind of haunting or some kind of activity in it. I've worked places where things were seen and would happen. So, again, it's one of those things. And my official answer is, I don't know. It's one of those things, the more you delve into it and the more you study it, the more questions you have. I've yet to find any real, what I would consider hard and fast or scientific answers, but that's the beauty of it. If you had all the answers, if you had a Bigfoot and you could poke it and prod it and study it and talk to it or dissect it or whatever, it wouldn't be near as much fun to sit and pontificate and wonder, what it is, where it came from. Is it a species we're not aware of? Is it an interdimensional being? Is it both? To me, that would take the fun out of it if you had answers and you could say a ghost is this and a Bigfoot's that and a UFO is this. I don't know. The thrill's in the chase, to me.
Oh, and that's what that's what likens it all to, this concept of an initiatory experience or a mystery school. That there's this element of, think about this. The cult of Pan, who used grottos and caves as their temples, right? The cult of Pan all identified each other, the members, by wearing a pendant that was a cicada, which is known in the United States as a jarfly.
Mm-hmm.
And the studio where we made this podcast is located above Jarfly Brewing.
More synchronicities, more coincidences.
But it just belies this underlying structure that's the thing. It's like all of these little pieces keep drawing you into the mystery.
And it's kind of like the retro causality that you talked about, where
yes.
Did something in the future cause them to name that in the past so it would be this in the present when you're there above it? Boggles the mind, man.
And that gets into, mystical toponymy and James Shelby Downard, that some places are named a certain thing because, later in the history of the place, in the future, something will happen there that's related to the name of the place, right? It's almost as if the people in the past that gave the place its name did so because they were influenced by some event from the future.
And it's like, especially like in David Paulides' work, the Missing 411 stuff, a lot of these places that have a devil name or a hell name, it's got that for a reason. It was considered cursed by the Native Americans. Strange things happen there. Devil's Canyon, Devil's Tower, whatever it is, they're just, it all kind of feeds back into itself.
It's weird. I do think, I think for me too, a lot of this it's been sort of a transformative experience, when I set out to do this, like we were talking about, I just wanted to gather local folklore. I really just wanted to kind of dig into the town and the history of the town. And it's just weird how that sort of entrance into this we became a part of this, right? And that's a friend of ours is a folklorist, and I think she's going to be a part of the second season and kind of talk about folklore. I really want her to say some things about the study of folklore.
Mm-hmm.
And she had asked me, she said, how do you feel about becoming part of the story? Because when it's
that's
true,
kind of ominous sounding,
right? But it taints your perspective because it's like if you're a folklorist, you're studying folklore. You're studying a people or a place or how those people in that place interact with each other. And that's really what I set out to do with the Pennyroyal, project, was to really see, was it the people that affected this place, or was it the place that redefined this the people that live here? Because it was so interesting. I was finding all these, just this rich history of stories. And I love stories. My daughter's name is Story because I love stories.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so like it's so crazy to dig into this. And really I was just collecting all these stories and intrigued by all of these insane things I was hearing. And then it was like suddenly it was like, I think honestly it was the intersection of with Hellier that we really began to become part of the story, and then began to realize that there was this deeper layer to all of this, and that we personally were involved in it, that we personally were connected somehow, and that violates the rules of studying folklore. You can't be a folklorist and participate in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my friend who is a folklorist, who has a PhD in folklore, said to me. She was like, this does sort of, how do you feel about that? And I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, it's almost like the time travel conundrum there, that you could go back as an observer, but you can't do anything to alter the timeline or alter the story. And that's the way I feel about it. I want to be there to observe it and document it and then retell it, but I don't want to be a part of it necessarily, although sometimes you don't get a choice.
Yeah, totally. And well, I mean, that was the thing too that was weird about all of this, is that mine, the Mount Victory mine, if you that place, after Gaterma died in the plane crash, the U.S. government took over the land, which is strange. But they took it over, and it's the most polluted part of this county. It's a horribly polluted place, but it's also a really beautiful place. And when you think about that mine there, if we hadn't looked at that mine, it would have never been anything other than just a hole in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But because we did look at it, because we did this research, because we looked, tracked down this folklore, it's now a mythic place in this story, in a sense, right? Which is, to me, really strange that now it's been recontextualized because of our observation of the place.
Yeah, and that happens sometimes. I mean, like with some of my stories and things in my books that either I've found or that I've heard from other people and stuff, by telling that and putting it out there in a book and on a YouTube video or whatever, it becomes a part of that. It just that's one way of passing it on. I like to think, that a lot of the, especially stories I collected from other people, the majority of those people have passed on now, and that's how their legacy lives on, or their story lives on, is through my work and what I'm doing. But then again, by publishing it or narrating or whatever, then I become a part of it too. So it's a weird dynamic.
It's beautiful, though. I mean,
it is. It really is.
And that's like, I think that's how reality functions.
Yeah.
And that's how our perception of reality is through narratives and through the stories that we tell ourselves.
Now, you love stories. Have you ever been to the International Storytelling Convention there in historic Jonesboro, Tennessee?
No, I haven't.
It's, I want to say the first weekend in October, maybe a different weekend, but they have it every year. This year it was all online because of everything that's going on. But that is amazing. They have a center there, a research place, the International Storytelling Center. And then every year they have this big festival. They have people from all over the world. I've never participated, but I've gone several times and just listened to the stories. And it will blow your mind. It's the best way to spend a weekend if you love stories.
That sounds wonderful, man.
And that wouldn't be too far of a drive for you either.
Yeah, that's super close. I saw somebody post about that on Facebook this year, Don. I didn't realize how big it was.
Well, you mentioning folklore and stories and things, have you got something from the area, some sort of folklore or a legend or a ghost story or something you could share with us?
I've got a couple. I'll tell you too. Also, don't let me forget, because I did want to tell you the story of the trailer.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about there.
Which is crazy, but one of the, I think we cut this from the show. There was so much that we had to cut that was just like, this is Boone Williams. This is all kind of crazy too. My neighbor who told me all of the crazy murder stories, and then later found out that his family also owns the cabin where the elevator is, and it's mentioned in Hellier. He is in a band called Tiny Tiny with a very close friend of mine, Boone Williams, and it's a 3-person band, but so it's Phil Claunch and Boone Williams. So Phil did the soundtrack for Pennyroyal, and then Boone edited the soundtrack, or edited the whole show, and there was just a lot that Boone was just like, dude, you just can't put this in there, like save it for the second season, or put it in extra stuff. But he was like, it's just too crazy and too much stuff, just too many. I was giving him 2.5 hour episode, and he was like, you got to get this down to an hour, and he really helped to keep the rhythm of the story, really, really there. And I think it made it so much better. But one of the stories that I think we cut out of it was from the newspaper writer, Chris Harris. He's in the show. He talks about the murders and about the Meteor. But he told me this crazy story about his grandfather and another group of men in this area of the county called Elihu, which is another one of those like weird names where you're like, what in the world, Elihu. And they saw, it was kind of like the Paulding, or is it called the Paulding light? One of these ghost lights, right? And they would see this light out in this part of the county, but occasionally the light would come and then interact with them. And they would actually see this ball of light, and then it would go back to this place that it came from, and then vanish. Which I was like, oh, that's he had a great just sort of perspective on all of this, that how strange this area is. I've got to tell you this. I'm gonna put this on. This is on the Patreon that we've got going, the Liminal Lodge, where we're really like sharing all of our evidence and just all the newspaper articles and having all these great discussions about everything. You can check it out at Liminal Lodge. I haven't released this yet, but I'm going to. It's a crazy newspaper article from the late 1800s, and it's a picture of stalks of corn that have writing etched into the leaves of the corn.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so I'm going to, Steve, dude, I'm going to send this to you after we get off here, too.
Okay. I want to see that.
I want you to see it. I think it's Ogham, or Ogham, or however you say the old, is it Irish language, basically, like a very old language. But it's so weird. And so the local newspaper, they thought that it was the language of the angels, and that an angel had come down into this cornfield and had touched the corn with their hands and left behind this godlike script, this heavenly script, right? And so they have an etching of the corn stalks with this crazy ancient language here in Pulaski County.
Wow.
And
I've never heard of such a thing. That's just,
dude. It's
now
so
I've seen,
weird.
Like where you peel the bark off a piece of dead wood and the worms have eaten in there, and it almost looks like some sort of writing. But to actually find writing in a language that's understandable, that's, wow.
It looks like Ogham to me. I'll let everyone decide for themselves. But to me, it looks like Ogham. It's just, I don't know. It's just so strange, man. Oh, and the other story I'll tell you before I tell you this, the story about going to the mine, is that I actually think Mysterious Universe maybe even mentioned this on their podcast, but Casey County had a dog killer. That in the late 1800s, turn of the century, there was this thing that appeared. Apparently, it was like down in Texas, and then it moved northeast. And there are newspaper articles that sort of track this all along the way, and it ends up on the border of Casey County and Pulaski County, and it was this creature that I think it killed 60 dogs in a 2-week period, and it ripped their heads off. And they formed a posse to hunt this thing. And the people that found it all reported seeing a different thing. And that was what was really strange. It's like they all found the thing, but the way that it represented itself to each of the people in the posse was different. And so they had, conflicting descriptions of it. But it seemed to be this weird creature. And it was only for this 2-week period. And then after that, and then they shot at it, it got away. But after that, it just vanished. And no one ever sighted it ever again. And it's another one of those stories where you wonder, was this some type of interdimensional interloper? Or just, I don't know. Was a doorway opened? Did the Kentucky Anomaly, tear space and time somehow and allow this thing to hunt here for a while? And then it got pulled back to the time and place that it was supposed to be.
Wow.
It's just weird, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those are all newspaper articles too, man. You can, if anybody out there, it's kind of pricey, but newspapers.com.
Absolutely. Heather
Dude.
Mosier, she's a classics professor at Kent State University in Ohio. She's one of the writers for this channel. She has a subscription to that, and all the time I'm like, Heather, look up this for me.
Oh, God.
So I'm going to put her on that.
Dude, we do it. I mean, we could have never found all the Gaterma stuff without it. And also, there's a link to a special archive for Pulaski County, for the Commonwealth Journal, and then all their older stuff, and that's been incredible.
It's
and then
amazing.
Shaking Paper, the old publications, those things, man. It's crazy. Like, people really need to look at what they can access in their area to research folklore, because in the show, we're talking to Richard Spence, who's a great historian. He wrote Aleister Crowley, Secret Agent 666, and he was a co-author on the Empire of the Will series, and he's the consultant for the U.S. Espionage Museum.
And just as a side note there, he was the recent guest on Conspiranormal with Adam Sane. That episode just posted today, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely go listen to that. I mean, Richard's awesome. He's in Pennyroyal. He's been a great source of information for our investigation. It's just amazing. But he was talking about all this, and he said, it's not just, because I'd contacted him because of the similarities between the murders in San Bernardino and the Empire of the Will, mystery, and how those murders seem to correlate with the murders that I was finding here in Somerset. And so, we had him on the show. We interviewed him about all this stuff, and we talked about it all. And he said, it's not just San Bernardino. It's not just the town he grew up in. It's not just Somerset. This weirdness, this strangeness, it's happening in every town, in your town. And that's, again, it's just like, dig deeper, find out about the place you live, because it's going to redefine how you think about yourself.
It is, and not just necessarily the paranormal, but there's all these old scandals and local mysteries, missing persons, unsolved murders. There's everything out there. Once you scratch and dig a little under the surface of any town, anywhere, you're going to find just this plethora of weird stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, that's why I brought up the whole thing about self transformation. It's just like. I don't know. It's amazing to interact with these stories, but also to create new stories and to be part of new folklore that we're literally, we're involved in recording it, Even this is a recording of folklore.
Yeah, and this is the internet, and conceivably this is out there forever.
Yeah, that's the thing, and people are gonna, come back to these stories. They're gonna reference these stories, and it's just amazing. Just for me, it's just amazing to be a part of all of this and to engage with this, and honestly, like maybe that is what the paranormal is, or that is what the phenomena is really the narrative that's created between you and an experience that you just don't understand. And that's the beautiful thing. Is like, maybe that's all it needs to be. It needs just to be that space that's created between who you are and the world and the parts of the world that you just don't understand.
Absolutely. Very well said. Now then, you've been teasing us. I want to hear the story. This was in the trailer. I'm going to pop the screen capture up here. It's on the screen now. It'll be coming up. There's a little bit of a delay here. But this was in the trailer where there's a bunch of hooded figures standing in a road, and a car drives up and just stops, and they just stand there. They don't move. They don't do anything. Should be hitting your screens right about now. Tell us about that scene. There's a funny story apparently that goes along with that.
Yeah, so this was crazy. So it was the final, what I was calling the final weekend of production, and this was during the summer. And I wanted to shoot a trailer to promote the podcast, and I had an idea for it, and also the final scene of the podcast, and really the opening of the podcast and the final scene are part of the same moment. And I just in interacting with this and researching all of this idea that we were somehow receiving a signal, like from a mystery station, or one of these number stations, that somehow there was a broadcast, and that we were picking up on it and interpreting it or solving it. So I wanted to create a beacon, and I built this. I hired some people to cut some mirrors for me, and hired some other artists, and we built this 6-foot tall pyramid of mirrors. And I wanted to take it out to the mine, because I had seen all of these. I love art, and I'd seen these fantastic. It was a fantastic photography series of mirror sculptures in the forest, and whenever they place the mirror sculptures in the forest, it vanishes, because of the reflection of all the foliage and the trees. And I thought, that's such a great descriptor, great sort of thematic device for this project, because that mine, again, would forever be just this hole in the ground. But we've reinterpreted it. We've recontextualized it into this new thing, this new symbol that it is. And so I was like, we got to take this monument out there, this beacon. And I had a shortwave broadcaster, and I had created this audio signal. And I was like, we're going to take it out there, we're going to put it at the mine, and we're going to turn it on. And people can drive out here and pick up that signal the same way that we picked up the signal. And I was like, to me, it was just this poetic way to end it all. And so it was like 15 or 20 people. It was quite a few people came with us. It was a caravan. And we drove 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere to where the mine was. It's like this road that goes forever. And we get out there, and so we all park. A lot of people decided to take hallucinogens because they felt like they were in a very like spiritual moment, you know. And I was like, I've got to shoot this trailer, you know. I've got to get this done. And we carry this 6-foot tall pyramid of mirrors 1.5 miles into the woods to this mine and erect it. And I recorded that final piece of audio that you hear in the podcast. And then we carry the thing out, right? And Dan Dutton pointed out to me, he was like, you know, because I was going to shoot this trailer for the show, right? And all these people were dressed in purple robes, and so they're all carrying this crazy 6-foot pyramid in purple robes out from this mine. And Dan was like, dude, it was like this crazy. It was like we were part of a ritual. We were the cult that we were looking for. Right?
I've got a picture of the pyramid actually up on there now.
Yeah. And so like it was just one of those strange things where you're like, yeah, that's true. Like we came here to, you know, this whole story is about, is there a cult here? And here we all are. We're all dressed in these purple robes. So anyway, we get back up to the cars, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to, you know, everybody get robed up, and I had Steven Snyder, our parapolitical researcher, on the show, and he was there. He had come down from West Virginia to do it with us. And that picture that you're showing right now too, that's one of behind it is the pond that they use it's a filtration pond. And then there's another pond about 100 feet below that spills over into. It's crazy. I mean, the place is nuts. And even Dan Dutton, who he studies a lot of herbs, he collects herbs. He said this area was a medicine area. Like the whole area was, there were so many different types of herbs that he believed they had to have been planted by somebody who was trying to create an area to cultivate plants used for rituals. You know, it's strange. It's just strange, all of these things. But so we take the pyramid down there, we carry it out, and I have Steven Snyder drive my vehicle, and I couldn't drive because I was shooting the video, and I needed them to drive me. And so Steven drives he drives my car over a cliff. He backs it up over this cliff into a bunch of trees. And our guide, Josh Van Hook, who's the guy that talks at the beginning of the series and everything, he's a former Marine. He's fantastic. He does all kinds of he's an outdoor adventure company here in town. He ends up getting the car unstuck, but it was this crazy thing. But Steven drives it was a Land Rover, right? He drives it over this cliff and jams it between two trees. And I'm like, oh my God. It was weird because I was in the back and I had a camera mounted, you know, and I thought we were just going to like back up and film this scene, and then we drive over this cliff. So I get out of the car. I'm, you know, trying to stay calm. I'm telling everybody like it's all cool, you know, like we'll figure this out. And all of a sudden, these headlights appear, and again we're 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere on this 1-lane road at this mine, and all of a sudden these lights approach, and I'm like, oh shit. Because everyone's in robes, these purple robes, right? And I'm like, oh shit, you know. So the dude, the vehicle drives by, right? And the guy and some of the people with me are like, we got guns, man, because Josh had a gun. He's a former Marine, he's like, the backwoods area. He's like, I got a gun. It's cool, dude. And I'm like, stay calm. Get my car unstuck. Let's get out of here. And so the truck turns around and he drives back. He pulls up. He parks. And I'm like, oh, shit. And again, like I said, a lot of people in this situation were on hallucinogens because they were looking for this experience, to happen. And so I'm dead sober. I'm trying to film this trailer. Somebody's got to keep this on the rails, right? So I run to the vehicle that just stopped, and I'm like, hey, this guy gets out, and it's a little S10. He says, yeah, you gotta watch out. You gotta watch out. You're in a snake nest. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you're in a snake nest. And he was pointing at where the truck had went over the cliff, right? And I'm like, dude, there are no snakes there because the truck just landed down there and they've all gone. And he's like, there's a snake nest. And he says, you want to see some snakes? And I'm like, what? And literally everyone behind me is in a purple robe, right? They're like what you see on the screen. Everyone's dressed that way, right? And with their shit pulled back, their heads were, you can see who they were, but they're all in purple robes. And the dude beckons me over to the back of his S10. And there are all these Tupperware containers, these huge Tupperware containers. And there's just hundreds of snakes. And he says, I sell these to the churches.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
what? Snake handling.
And he's like, churches. Yeah, he's like, you want to hold one? And I was like, no, dude. And meanwhile, the guys that are trying to get the truck out are freaking out. And they're like, is he causing you problems? Is he causing you problems? And they've got guns. And I'm like, chill out. And this dude's like, he's like, look at all my snakes. And so I'm like, thanks, man. And I'm thinking, what's this guy thinking? Because everyone's standing around this situation in purple robes.
So he's not excited about the cultist or the pyramid or the radio signal.
Yeah,
but
there's a
be careful of the snakes.
Pyramid, And so I'm like freaking out. I finally convinced the guy, I don't want to buy any snakes. I don't want to touch any snakes. Thank you. And he was like, do you need a tow truck? And I was like, no, we got it. So he leaves, and we finally do get the truck unwedged between two trees. But Dan Dutton was like, dude, I want you to know that I already thought you were performing a ritual by making everyone wear robes and carry a 6-foot pyramid of mirrors out of this place. But he said, when the snake handler showed up, I really thought that fucking, that Satan was going to appear, and I was like, at the time, I didn't even think about any of this stuff, but it was such a crazy situation to have this dude in 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere show up with a truckload of snakes, and we're all dressed in these purple robes, and I was like, and we are the cult,
And you think about that, the symbolism of the snake, snake eating its own tail, or the intertwined snakes that you have, the caduceus there, and again that follows back into Crowley and all this hermetic stuff. It's a never-ending cycle, man. It just goes on and on and on.
It's so crazy. Anyway, but that's how the podcast ended. That was the final weekend of production, and it was like, wow.
And speaking on behalf of myself and other people, I'm sure, when are more episodes coming out? I've already listened to every one of them. I'm on my second or third run through now of some of them. We're hungry for more. Please tell us there's more on the way.
Man, thanks for listening to it too. It really is. I hope that we're able to communicate how personal
it is, and it's just so good. And I saw just a glowing write-up about it, and I can't remember where it was, but it's one of these places that normally writes about stuff from the BBC or NPR, and they're talking about pennyroyal, and the production values are there, the fact that you do it in a studio, it's got that top shelf quality to it, and then just the material. You won't find this anywhere else.
Yeah, man, and seriously, thanks, Steve, for
oh, absolutely,
huge enjoying it and being a part of it too, and engaging in the conversation of afterwards, because I think we'll probably have the next season out summer of next year, but there was so much. I mentioned the Bay Cabal earlier about the magicians, right? And oh man. After we get off the air, I have to show you something. so you're gonna freak out, but it's like the story keeps unfolding. But also, there was so much we couldn't put into this season because it's super weird. It's weird what we've been drawn into, and it's weird how it's still happening. And weird things since the show came out. There are weird things happening here in town. These signs are appearing.
Yeah, and I saw some of those pictures. Tell us about that.
Dude, that was weird too, because it was like a woman. This is like a week after the show comes out. This woman walks out of nowhere, just like downtown, walks up there, and our studio is across from the sheriff's department, the bar, right? So it's like sheriff's department, across the street is Jarfeld Brewing. And then our bar, then above it, our studio is right above the bar. And so it's weird that she walks up and she puts this crazy sign about how this town is a research town. And they reference Lester Burns, Sammy Ketchum, the assassinated sheriff. Like all these people that were involved in all these controversies here in town. And then, two other people, it was like her and then another man and a different guy put up another 6 signs all over town that talk about how this town is a cult. Call the FBI, cyber terrorists. And then they finally, last weekend, culminated in climbing on top of a house near downtown and spray painting all of this crazy stuff about this is a cult, this town is a cult, and I'm like, what is going on? You know what I mean? Like, because it's just like, it's like,
and then some of those pictures you had of graffiti around town where it's all this stuff written out and talking about I can't even remember what some of the stuff was, but anthrax and things like that.
Yeah. It was all just really strange, old conspiracy theories. Even, you know what I mean? Plus they were COVID is a conspiracy theory, and it's, I don't know. It was so weird to me just because they referenced Lester Burns and Sammy Ketchum, because then you have to ask the question: did these people listen to the podcast? And if they didn't listen to the podcast, and they posted these things on the windows and on the walls of places downtown, that makes it even stranger.
And then what would they think if they heard the podcast? They'd be like, oh my God, this is it. This is what we're talking about.
Well, is it that they're picking up on the broadcast of the podcast, right? You know what I'm saying? Have they haven't listened to the podcast, but somehow these ideas are getting in their heads, I don't know, man.
Now, do you still have the pyramid out there sending out a signal?
We brought it back. It is in the studio because I panicked a little bit after we finished the show, and I said, look, I'm afraid that people will try to find the beacon and someone will get hurt at this mine. And then it'll be like, hey, man, you created a beacon to draw people there.
An attractive hazard. We're gonna blame you.
People got hurt, so we brought it back. And it's going to end up in the museum, the paranormal museum that Kyle owns. There's a pennyroyal section of the museum, and so he's going to put it in there. Right now, it's upstairs. It's actually the backdrop for. We've been doing a few very small listening room concerts. Socially distanced, mask, some music for bands, and it's the backdrop. It's in the back of that. So we've got it right now. But ultimately, if you come to Somerset and you go to Kyle's museum, you'll see the pyramid. And
wow.
Just know that it was involved in some weird.
As soon as I get back east, I'm coming to Somerset.
Dude, you have to come down here. You have to come down here, and you have to ride around with me.
Oh man, I would love nothing more. Yeah, at some point I plan on moving back to East Tennessee, and Somerset's just up the road, basically. So definitely, I'd love to come and hang out with you guys.
That's so good, man. It's just weird. I don't know. I mean, who knows what's happening? But ultimately. Yeah, the next we are working on some episodes in the interim that are like Pennyroyal presents various things, right, that we're working on, and I think that's going to carry us through if people want to like hear about dog sacrifice and the cult of Hecate, or Hecate.
And I know you were talking about that. You had a live broadcast last night on Facebook.
Yeah.
As part of the Liminal Lodge, which is also a group on Facebook, right? Have I got that correct?
That's the group for our Patreons. Everybody
that you were talking about that night, the 16th, was the actual night that these things went on historically.
How crazy was that, though? That was weird.
So that wasn't planned out. It just happened that way.
Yeah, so that there's the above light side, which is a tree, but then the night side is this root system, right? And so it's so crazy when that Darian found that, and then he says, the night you're supposed to enter the tunnels of Set is November the 16th, right? So it's like the cult of Hecate. You're supposed to give your offerings November the 16th.
Wow.
Then we find that you're supposed to enter these tunnels. But it's so weird because Somerset has rebranded itself as See My Set. Hashtag See My Set.
It just gets weirder and weirder, man.
Dude, it's so weird. It's like, what is going on? Like, why? Like, there are all these stories of tunnels and all this subterranean, this current of subterranean things and this motif. It's so crazy to think of tunnels underneath Somerset, and so it's like tunnels of Set, and I don't know, man. It's just, how do you explain it all? Like what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. Oh well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and it was on short notice too. But I find this thing fascinating, and I want to stay in touch and. Keep an eye on what's going on. Everybody go over to Facebook, and you can find the Pennyroyal Podcast page on there. Wow, what a thank you for the super chat there, T Tui. I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Every penny goes back in to support the channel. But yeah, look for the Pennyroyal Podcast on Facebook. There's a page there where you can keep up with it and what's going on. Nathan, it was my pleasure, man. I'd love to have you back on again sometime. And thank you for this past 2 hours. This is amazing. Some people are saying that the video did get stuck there. Refreshing your browser should have taken care of that. If you go back and start over from the beginning, you'll be able to watch the whole thing. Nathan, any parting words? Anything you want to say to the audience here?
The only thing I would say is definitely check out the podcast. It's on all the platforms, but Apple, podcast, Spotify. I think it looks beautiful on Spotify, by the way.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with.
Yeah, I've got a link to the Apple podcast in the description of the video, but yeah, anywhere they can listen to it, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and also I do want to say that we have this Patreon going that we call the Liminal Lodge, and it's all of our research. It's, we're basically, as the show is happening for the second season, it's you can be a part of it. And we need people to help us sort through the mountain of information.
And that's what I like about the idea of it, that it is interactive to a degree. You can be part of the show behind the scenes even.
Yeah.
But I'm planning on joining your Patreon. I want to be a member of the Liminal Lodge and learn the secret handshake and get the tattoo or brand or whatever it is we have to get.
And Steve, man, thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Like I said, anytime you want to come back, you just let us know. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us tonight. Again, my guest was Nathan Isaac from Pennyroyal Podcast. Be sure and check that out. Again, it's on Facebook. It's wherever fine podcasts are served. You can check me out here on this channel or on 13 Past Midnight. Thanks again for showing up. Everybody have a good night, good evening, good morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Steve Stockton, and I love every one of you. Good night, everybody. Thank you.